Continuing to update our photo sharing application to work with MongoDB. We've seen how we've set up the database operations and we've got the code for that already. So now we need to modify our application to be able to use the new functionality, specifically the ability to add new albums and photos. So what we need to do here is we're going to add a couple of new routes. One of which will just be, we're using CRUD again, the create, create, retrieve, update, and delete. And so the cool thing is to add an album, I'm just going to say albums.json, but instead with a put. Now, in the album handler here, I've actually created a new function called create album. And if we go to handlers albums, you'll see here that I've actually got here the create album function. Similarly, to retrieve a specific album, I still have get album, but now I need also the ability to retrieve photos in an album and add photos to an album. So I'm going to say, let's be lazy and help ourselves out. So I need to get the photos from an album, and that is photos for album. And then I need to be able to add a new photo to an album, and that will be add photo to album, like that. So that's going to be the modifications to our API to make all this work. And don't forget that if we want to be able to add data or send bodies or files along, I'm going to need to also here app.use express.bodyParser. And I'm going to say keep extensions true here as well, so that the file name extensions like JPEG or whatever are preserved for us and everything. So let's go back and look at our album handler again. At the top, I created a couple classes. I created an album class, so when the code down below gets the data back from the album data handler, it actually creates an instance of this class. And I can use that, for example, to load the photos for it or something. I can actually also use this to add a photo to the album. And one of the most interesting and I think kind of important functions actually is this response object here. And that is sometimes an object will have properties on it that I don't want to return in my JSON API, like I need to scrub them or something. So what I do is on all of my objects that will be sending data back to the user, I add this response object method, which lets me filter out and only include the things that I want to. For example, on a user, I would never want to return the password hash or something like that. So I created an album class, and then I also created a photo class here too, and it doesn't do quite as much stuff. I basically just created that, so I have something in my code that's nice to work with. And again, I have the response object, and all it does is strip out the ID field like that. So the create album method here doesn't really do much stuff. It does a little bit of checking, and then it creates the album with the data from the back end. Once it gets that, it creates the album object, and then it gets the response object and sends the success back to the user, or the caller of the API. Similarly, the get album doesn't do a whole lot more. I basically get the do a little data checking, otherwise go to the back end, fetch the album by name, and then either send a failure depending on what the problem was, or create the album object and then send that back filtered. To list albums, even simpler. I just directly get all of the albums straight from the data module with some simple parameterization here. This would be a fun exercise for you to actually go ahead and try to insert some support for query parameters into the app or something. And then again, what I do is for each thing I get, I create an album object, I filter it out, and then I spit that out. Now, to get the photos for an album, I do a little bit of paging with query parameters here and everything. And then what I do is I get the album first, because I need to know what its photos are. And once I got the album, I create this album object, and then I call its give me the photos method. Once I've got that, I create an array of those photos. I sanitize them, and I scrub them. And then in my final results function here, I set up the data and either send an error or set up the data and send the success back to the caller. So the only other thing we have to do is add photo to an album. Again, I do a bunch of checking here. There's actually almost, in most of these functions, there's almost more sort of error handling code than there is code that actually works. And I debated before I did these live lessons, and I always debate this before I write any programming code. It does add a lot of lines of code, and it distracts from the fact that really the core work is happening here. But I think it's such an important part of writing a web application is to sort of have good, helpful error messages, good, secure error handling. You really appreciate when you're working with an application server that's really telling you what's going on and communicating and behaving properly. And I think so many people sort of see examples where error handling is left until later that this is one of the reasons we have so many bugs and so much crashing. So I don't feel too guilty about throwing in all this error handling code. So again, I get the album by name. And then the album itself has the add photo method here, which basically just goes to the back end and has the data album do its work to add it to the collection and move the file and everything. So that is the basics of setting up the APIs. We have 3 new APIs we added here, the app put and then the photos put. We added the body parser to everything so we can definitely send bodies and receive files and everything. So in the last section of this lesson, I'll show you the new pages we added, and then we'll throw it all together and hopefully it'll all work for us.